Space, the final frontier. These are the voyages of the short-horsed ginger elf Torin. Her mission, to explore the history of her Star Trek fandom, to seek out her own opinions and shamelessly throw them into the ether, to boldly go where no elf has gone before. Hello there, ladles, jelly spoons, and other assorted kitchenware, and welcome to episode 2 of Tor Talks. I'm Torin, but you guys can call me Tor. I'm autistic and I'm a full-time nerd, but if you've seen any of my other channels or videos, you know this already. If you're new to my channel, however, and you like what you hear, then go ahead and lay the smack down on that like button, hit that subscribe button, and stick around till the end, because I've got a question for you. In today's episode, I'm going to be talking Star Trek. Now, if you've seen my Doctor Who video, then you already know I'm a big Star Trek fan from childhood. Like with Doctor Who, there's almost nothing belonging to the Star Trek brand that I've seen that I've hated, so don't expect much criticism from me on that score. It's not like it's fucking perfect or anything like that, but it's pretty close in my estimation. I will acknowledge that I have not seen everything that falls under the umbrella of Star Trek. You'll also know from watching my Doctor Who video that I have a big thing for Commander Data. It's an issue. Much like with Doctor Who, my fandom of Star Trek is pretty much directly leads back to my dad. I'll be honest, there's a lot of that in my life. I was a bit of a daddy's girl when I was growing up. He's the reason I love nature documentaries and motorbikes and football, or soccer, to other parts of the world. I watched Star Trek Picard again recently, and as a result, I'm going to take a minute to reiterate my love for Brent Spiner, but this time properly. His portrayal of Commander Data is just beautiful. He gives the character such life and soul, it's testament to his skill. Not to mention, even to this day, in my humblest of opinions, Brent Spiner is gorgeous. I'll admit, I developed a crush on Data as a kid that's lived long into adulthood, but if you listen to me anywhere else, you know I can get a bit too emotionally attached to characters in the media that I take in. Now, I will be focusing more on the TV series than the movies, but I will be talking about the movies as well, so worry not, Cumberbitches, he gets a mention. My love for Star Trek began back in the late 80s with The Next Generation. Jean-Luc Picard, Data, Worf and LaForge, Beverly Crusher and Deanna Troi. Some of the best characters in science fiction in my opinion. Besides the Doctor and the Master, obviously. Now, I won't be going into endless detail about the goings-on. The likelihood is if you're here listening, you're probably a Star Trek fan already. I loved Jean-Luc's way of dealing with people, and the fact that he developed over time and through his many trials. The most memorable of which, I think, was probably episode 6 of season 3, The Best of Both Worlds, where he was assimilated into the Borg as Locutus, whereupon the Borg absolutely crush Starfleet, slaughtering something like 11,000 people at the Battle of Wolf 359. This particular series is packed with 7 seasons of amazing stuff, from the introduction of the Borg and the Cardassians to meeting Gwinan in the 10 Forward Lounge. Contrary to popular feeling, however, I'm not opposed to Wesley Crusher. I'm not his biggest fan, but I don't hate him. Next Generation was undoubtedly the most popular Star Trek property at the time, being the most watched series of all of them. Something like 30 million people watched the finale, ranking it the second highest ratings pool that week. I think that is more than just a passing nod to the quality of acting from the cast, the work from the crew, and amazing stories by the phenomenal writers, that it was still massively successful all the way up until Paramount decided to cancel it before its 8th season, even though the cast had been contracted for 8. If I remember correctly, even though they were showing Next Generation on BBC One, at some point on BBC Two, repeats of the original series were being shown, and I would watch those too. I definitely know I saw some of the original series back then, because I fell madly in love with Spock as well. I'm fucking pissed with William Shatner given his comments on an autism charity I'm not going to name, comments which continue to this day. However, none can say that his portrayal of James T. Kirk isn't iconic. I will say that his strange vocal patterns when he speaks are rather jarring to me at times, even though they're not as pronounced as people often portray them in skits or impressions. And I enjoyed the original series well enough, but Next Generation is definitely where my wee Star Trek loving heart lies. The year before Next Generation ended, of course, came Deep Space Nine. And this series for me was strange, because it wasn't set on a ship, it was set on a space station, and that I found really fucking odd, actually. I don't like change much, so it took me a while to get used to it, and by association, I think, unfortunately, Cisco probably took a bit of a hit as a result. It's a shame, really, that the first couple of seasons I didn't really rate it much, and it's still not one of my favourite series of Star Trek. I have to give it its due. It was woke before woke was a thing. There were some really strong stories, some really great characters. Bringing in Worf was a good move, and the introduction of the Defiant in the third season was a great idea and is probably what saved it for me, if I'm honest. It was a bit of a return to the norm which helped me to settle more into the stories. Honestly, even to this day, the most memorable member of Deep Space Nine cast to me was Quark. That shady little Ferengi was hilarious. I do, however, remember wanting to be Kira Nerys. She was pretty awesome, in my humblest of opinions. 2 years after Deep Space Nine began, and set in the same time period, we got Voyager, and I loved this series. Honestly, it kind of distracted me from Deep Space Nine. Kate Mulgrew is one of my favourite actresses, and that began with Catherine Janeway. Characters like Neelix, who was just so sweet and optimistic and funny, and B'Elanna Torres, the half Klingon, who seemed always a little torn between the two halves of her genetics, and then of course my absolute favourite of the whole show, Tuvok. I was absolutely fucking besotted with Tuvok. Tim Russ's portrayal made me absolutely adore the character. The things he had been through shaped his character so much, and it became obvious that while he still found Neelix annoying, as most people did, after becoming merged with him in one particular episode, he seemed to soften towards him slightly. Although, like with anyone, Neelix's character could become a bit much for Tuvok to deal with. You know, looking at my Star Trek crushes, it appears to me perhaps I have a bit of a thing for Vulcans. Maybe it's the ears, I wonder. Anyway, this series also brought in new alien races, such as the Kazon, species 8472, and the Vidians. The universe and lore of Star Trek is much like our own universe, ever evolving, growing, shrinking and changing all the time, much like Doctor Who. Who knew I could fit yet another Doctor Who reference into a Star Trek episode? Is anyone keeping score? Now, the same year Voyager ended, we got Enterprise. This series was a prequel to the original series, set about 100 years beforehand, and it covered humanity's early exploration of deep space and the run-up to the creation of the United Federation of Planets. This series pulled in someone from my early sci-fi enjoyment from childhood, but not quite a fandom, if I'm honest, Quantum Leap's Scott Bakula. During the first season, I really became attached to a couple of the characters. I do like Bakula's Archer, and I really liked Paul, yet another Vulcan. I'm definitely not in a pattern here. Dr. Phlox was an interesting character. His personality came across a lot like me in a lot of ways, and I sort of identified with him a bit, other than the three wives, obviously. But in all honesty, I didn't see a lot of this series. I did enjoy, however, what I did see. My favourite character, however, was Trip Tucker. Again, yet another crush, this time not one with pointy ears. That's a surprise. I know he could be a bit of a hot-headed arse sometimes, and he was a flawed character, but I have a thing for scientists and engineers, linguists and artisans. Unfortunately, I sort of fell off around the third series, and I heard it got cancelled in 2005. By that time, I was a mother, fully grown adult, and I had a kid and another on the way. My life had become rather hectic. We didn't get another television series from Star Trek until 2017. Now, I am probably going to get a lot of shit for this, because I've seen a lot of the buzz around Discovery, but I really like it. And I really like Michael. Yes, it's another prequel series, and it begins 10 years before the beginning of the original series. Michael's battle to get her commanding officer to believe her in the first episode was so passionate and desperate. The acting's just amazing. As a human raised by Vulcans, specifically raised as the sister of Spock, Michael's emotional nature sort of rails against her Vulcan upbringing. Struggling to control my emotions now, that I can relate to. I'd be lying if I said that this show hadn't given me any crushes either. Sylvia, Tilly, Saru, and Stamets are all amazing characters in my opinion. The storyline of Michael being blamed for the war between the Klingons and the Federation really wound me up, however. She was only following orders. What I did love was the propulsion system. That and the giant tardigrade type creature. That thing was amazing. But seriously, a propulsion system driven by spores? Genius! I also happen to be a big fan of Jason Isaacs, although not so much in this series. Lorca is an asshole, so seeing him get his was good. I'm not 100% sure about Chris Pike, but he seems like a good guy. His position is meant to be temporary, however we shall see what happens come season 3. Also, I just want to throw this one out, Spock is hot! Anywho, Vulcan perving aside, this is where we get to my most recent obsession. Star Trek Picard is phenomenal. Just my opinion, hate me if you like, I don't fucking care. It's telly, and if you're hating over that, you need a hobby. And I throw that specifically to the not my doctors in the Doctor Who community. Anyway, I digress. I got so excited at the possibility of seeing Jean-Luc back at the helm of a starship, I almost wet my pants. So when I actually watched the show and it wasn't quite like that, I wasn't even the slightest bit bothered. JLP is awesome, and P. Stew is a god. Tell me I'm wrong if you like, but if you're going to try and serve me tea, make it Earl Grey. Hot. I really loved the casting. I have loved Santiago Cabrera as an actor ever since I saw The Musketeers on BBC a few years ago, and it was good seeing Harry Treadaway as Narek, the tasty Romulan. I will admit that the line, "I never knew Romulans could be so hot," came across as more than a tad racist, and is never picked up on, so it did make me cringe a bit. Personally, before Narek, I'd never found a Romulan attractive myself, but that wasn't a race thing, it's just the case. No idea why. It's not like they're not at all like Vulcans, being that they're biological cousins. Agnes's emotional and ethical internal battle when it comes to synthetics is well written, and I really loved seeing the relationship between Picard and Raffi, and the difficulties Elnor had in trusting Picard after he perceived he was left behind by him. I think the nuances are often missed by some, but I really enjoyed it. Of course, one of my favourite things in the season was the return, albeit for a short time, of 7 of 9. Shout out to my daddy who has a long-running crush on Jerry Ryan. I wasn't, however, so sure I liked the fact that Soji turned bad towards the end, but I don't think I really look at it like that. It was more of a desperation thing than anything else. However, I am glad how the season ended. It has to be said that Brent Spiner's performance during the goodbye between Picard and Data was so moving. He and Patrick Stewart clearly feel a deep friendship, which I think is shown in this moment. It moved me to tears, genuinely, although I'm not sure whether that had to do with the idea of never seeing Data in anything again to do with Star Trek, but given his death at the end of the Nemesis movie, I'd had to come to terms with that years before, so I would imagine probably not. Speaking of the movies, I think this is a great segue into the movie portion of this nerdy rant, and we have to start at the beginning there, so... Star Trek The Motion Picture came out in 1979 and received mixed reviews, either because people thought it lacked action sequences or relied too much on special effects. I enjoyed it, but the last time I saw it was when I was a child. Enjoying it is pretty much all I remember of it. Possibly one of the most famous of the Star Trek movies, if not the most famous Star Trek movie, came next, The Wrath of Khan in 1982. It received critical acclaim and is perhaps also the most well-loved of the movies. And unfortunately, yet again, the most I can remember about it was that I enjoyed it, as I do all things Star Trek that I watch. It was followed by a lackluster third film, partially directed by Leonard Nimoy, The Search for Spock, in 1984, the year I was born. Now again, while I could look online and give you descriptions of what happened, I think that would be disingenuous, as I personally cannot remember, and that would be unfair. Again, however, I do know I enjoyed it when I watched it. Now, I probably sound like I'm just saying these things, but it's honestly difficult for me to recall large swathes of my childhood with any great clarity, unfortunately. It's a bane I have to live with. After The Search for Spock came The Voyage Home in 1986, and much like many of the movie's pre-generations, I have great difficulty remembering it beyond knowing I enjoyed watching it. I do know it did well at the box office, and that it was entirely directed by Leonard Nimoy, a man whose death crushed me. Now, as we all know, I have my father to thank for these experiences, as he is the parent who's into sci-fi. Yes, Dad, I blame you. The next movie was The Final Frontier, and the only thing I remember from this one is finding out Spock had an older half-brother. That was interesting, especially as I'd always thought Sarek had only ever had one wife. The movie was panned by critics, and while initially successful at the box office, its takings swiftly dropped week on week. The last movie in the original series run was The Undiscovered Country, and clearly, after the disaster of a movie Shatner had directed, for he was the director of The Final Frontier, they pulled in another director to finish out the series. Again, this is a movie of which I have little memory due to being a child when I last saw it, but I do remember enjoying watching it with my family. The next series of movies were from The Next Generation, the first of which was Star Trek Generations. I believe it was meant to be a bridge between the original series movies and the Next Generation movies, as a continuation of the previous series, but I personally consider the Next Gen movies a separate series altogether, probably based on wanting to distance myself from most things fucking Shatner related. Generations was a good movie. The storyline was fantastic, and it was great to see my favourite cast on the big screen. It was a box office hit, but it did receive mixed reviews, and I would imagine that it was probably down to the dramatic difference in the quality of acting of its two main leads. We can all say Shatner was iconic in his portrayal of Kirk, but can we all say that he's as good an actor as Patrick Stewart or Chris Pine? I think not. When Star Trek First Contact came out in 1996, it had rave reviews, with Roger Ebert even considering it to be one of the best Star Trek movies. With a newly designed Enterprise and uniforms, and a new and improved Borg look, it went down a storm. I remember this. This is where I first truly became a bit scared of the Borg and learned the true meaning of resistance is futile. In 1998 we got Star Trek Insurrection, and now we're getting into the realm of movies I can remember more things about. Then again, this is a movie with an inordinate amount of Commander Data time in it, so of course I paid close attention. I really liked the story of this one, and the little touch of romance between Picard and the Baku woman Anij was sweet. Again, it's another of the movies I've not seen in years. However, writing this script has definitely got me wanting to rewatch a lot of the older films. 2002 saw the release of Star Trek Nemesis, and the less said about this movie the better in my humble opinion. Besides the death of my favourite character, the storyline was definitely not the strongest of the franchise. In fact, I think the only movie worse than this in the whole franchise was The Final Frontier. Now, while I personally think Peastew and Spiner pretty much carried the whole movie on their performances, I would be remiss in ignoring the hard work put in by the rest of the cast. Frankly, anyone would have been hard-pressed to bring this movie out of the dark hole Star Trek seemed to be falling into. As such, that movie is the last in the Next Generation scope of movies because just 7 short years later, they rebooted the entire film franchise. In 2009, Star Trek was released. The casting in this film was, for me, flawless. Chris Pine makes a much better James T. Kirk than Shatner did, and I think the casting of Zachary Quinto as Spock was genius. I hadn't been too sure when they'd said they were going to cast Simon Pegg as Scotty, because while I love Simon Pegg, I wasn't sure he would be able to carry off a believable Scottish accent. Luckily, he proved me almost wrong. It had some hitches here and there and wasn't an accent that I could identify for anywhere in Scotland, specifically being a Scot, but it did sound Scottish, which was the most important thing, I guess. It was a box office success, and unsurprisingly, it was nominated for several awards that year, and was the first Star Trek movie to win an Academy Award. It had a fantastic story, a great script, and fantastic casting. I particularly enjoyed Anton Yelchin's depiction of Chekhov. Star Trek Into Darkness was next up in 2013. And this movie brought back a favoured villain from the first run of movies, Khan Noonien Singh, played by Benedict Cumberbatch. Here you go, my Cumberbitches. This movie was met with rave reviews as well, and is at the time of recording the highest grossing Star Trek movie of the franchise. I loved to see the development surrounding the relationship between Spock and Uhura, and I enjoyed the changes that were made to the storyline surrounding Khan. I look forward to seeing what they do with it in the future, if anything. In my opinion, J.J. Abrams did a fantastic job with these movies. I would have loved to see him finish out the trilogy at least, if not further. 2016 gave us Star Trek Beyond, and this one was also met with good reviews. I personally loved it, and being the gigantic nerd that I am, I've already begun designing cosplays of my favourite alien characters. I absolutely love Jayla, for example, and cannot wait until I can get the opportunity to dress up as her for a convention. This movie was dedicated to Leonard Nimoy, who died a year before its release, and to Anton Yelchin, who died 1 month before the premiere. For two of my favourite Star Trek actors to pass away within a year of one another was personally hard for me to deal with, and my thoughts and prayers went out and still go out to their families. Yelchin's performance in this particular film was outstanding to me. I don't claim to be completely unswayed by my emotions when it comes to many things, but I'd seen the brilliance in his portrayal in the first two movies, and this one seemed just a little bittersweet given he didn't get to see it himself. All in all, however, I would say that we still have a lot to see from the Star Trek franchise, both on the small screen and on the big screen, and I, for one, couldn't be happier about that. So that's it. We've come to the end and are no longer Star Trekking across the universe. If you stuck around until the end, you're an absolute fucking diamond, and I appreciate you. Time for the question of the week. I want you guys to let me know what your favourite Star Trek movie is, what your favourite Star Trek series is, and who your favourite Starfleet captain is in the comment section below. And if you have any suggestions for topics, either within Star Trek or indeed any fandom, sling them up in here too. Please do give me a thumbs up, subscribe and ring that ding-a-ling so you don't miss when I upload, and feel free to follow me on Instagram, Twitter and Twitch, and my other YouTube channel where I play computer games like a noob, and my Dragon Age podcast Left of the Fate. The links for all of these will be in the description box below if my dumbass remembers, and I will catch you all on the other side of the universe. I'm out.